This lecture will focus on the regions of Europe, which are based on cultural and economic factors. This slide shows the regions that are generally wealthier and have a higher level of development above the dashed line, those being Northern Europe, Western Europe, and the British Isles. In contrast to the Mediterranean and Eastern Europe, which have lower levels of development. Stated another way, the European core is centered around northwestern Europe, with the periphery concentrated in the South and Eastern Europe. We will now begin our brief tour of the regions of Europe by looking at Western Europe, centered on Germany and France. This region is home to some of the world's most famous cities and landmarks, and one of the largest population clusters on Earth. Paris, France, for example, is a primate city because of its focus of cultural, economic, and political power within France. Rome, Italy, and London, England are examples of primate cities as well. It is helpful to remember that Europe's rise to power was centered on its ability to travel the seas and engage in trade and exploration of faraway lands. Coastal cities from Vienna, Italy to Copenhagen, Denmark became important centers of exchange of people and goods. Geographers know such places as entrepots, which translates to entry point. Germany represents the population and economic center of Europe. In addition to housing the largest population, Germany is also home to the largest economy, with almost a third greater domestic product than the two next countries, France and the United Kingdom. But income is not equally distributed in the country. This map, while 20 years old, represents a general pattern of greater wealth in the South and the West. This is partly a legacy of the former East Europe and the Communist bloc, as seen by the red line dividing the two. The map of Europe reveals a number of microstates, many of which are smaller than a typical California county in size. Liechtenstein, Monaco, and San Marino are three examples. San Marino represents an example of an enclave because it is completely surrounded by another state, in this case Italy. The British Isles as a region includes the sovereign states of the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland. The UK includes England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. The latter was the source of an ongoing conflict and bloody guerrilla warfare with the Irish Republican Army prior to the ceasefire agreement in 1998. Last year, Scotland narrowly voted to stay in the United Kingdom and not split off to become its own independent state. This is one of many examples of devolution in Europe, or forces that threaten to split countries. Moving to the Northern Europe region, we see the traditional Scandinavian countries of Norway, Sweden, and Finland, along with Denmark and Iceland. While Iceland is geographically removed, it is culturally connected with these other countries, in particular Denmark. This map illustrates oil fields and oil pipelines and gas lines that represent one source of wealth to this region. Also note the Baltic Sea, an important source of transport and trade. Northern Europe is anchored by the Scandinavian countries of Norway and Sweden, which are consistently ranked among the highest levels of development in the world. These countries have high per capita wealth and high standards of living, which includes education and medical coverage for all its citizens. These are accomplished through a system of high taxes, which puts these capitalist countries on the spectrum leaning towards socialism. As we learned last time, much of the rich history of Europe is centered on the region of Mediterranean Europe, which were home to the Greek and Roman empires. Spain and Portugal were the source of great learning, dating back to the days of Islamic control, and were later the point of departure for Columbus and others that ventured across the Atlantic Ocean. These places therefore represent culture hearths, which are sources of ideas and innovations that have far-reaching impacts. Florence, Italy, shown in the image, is one such ancient cultural hearth. Today, Mediterranean Europe is beset by economic problems. In 2008, the global economic crisis hit Mediterranean Europe particularly hard. For example, Greece became overextended with debt to the European Union, which in turn has led to so-called austerity measures, leading to many budget cuts and job losses, especially among government workers. The protest shown in this picture illustrates this point. In the region of Eastern Europe, we find countries that lie almost entirely in the periphery, outside the core. These countries were previously part of the so-called Eastern Bloc with close ties to the former Soviet Union. Today, we have free market economies and generally open societies, although levels of development, as reflected by transportation systems and communication networks, lags far behind other parts of Europe. Political instability is also an issue. Indeed, some of these countries have seen the Communist Party regaining ground and a return to authoritarian rule. Hungary is one such example. The Balkan War of the 1990s was the first great conflict in Europe following World War II. The United States eventually got involved and peace was achieved in 2002. This represents an example of a shatter belt, as its history has been characterized by chronic political splintering. A map of the countries, cultures, and languages of this transition zone between Christian West and Islamic East helps to understand this circumstance. Devolutionary forces eventually led to the breakup of the country of Yugoslavia. The map of the region today shows numerous new countries, including Montenegro, Kosovo, Serbia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Croatia, all of which were formed following the war. The war in the Balkans was an example of one of the principal causes of refugees, who are persons who have been forced to leave their countries in order to escape war, persecution, or natural disaster. There are more refugees in the world today than in any other time since World War II. This map illustrates the flow of refugees into Europe, described as the European migrant crisis of 2015 on this map. This process has continued through into 2018. You can see the top countries of origin, including Syria, Afghanistan, and Iraq, each of which have been embroiled in civil wars, with the United States playing various levels of involvement. It's also worth noting that refugees are fleeing from the former Yugoslav states, including Kosovo and Serbia. Note that Germany has received by far the most number of refugees, which has included or has brought a backlash as nationalist attitudes have led to violence and concern of a return to the ethnic hatred that drove the atrocities of Nazi Germany. This tension between accepting refugees and sealing borders is one of the defining cultural issues of the day in Europe. In contrast to the devolutionary forces threatening to split up European countries, the European Union represents a move towards cooperation among member countries. This is an example of supranationalism. The European Union today is in a period of uncertainty with the debt crisis and the recent exit of the United Kingdom from the EU, commonly known as Brexit. The UN remains one of the largest economic blocs in the world. Shifting gears, we will spend a few minutes talking about models of geography, the simplification of reality for the purposes of understanding general patterns and forms is the definition of a model. Here we see a model of DNA. In geography, von Thunen's model of agricultural economy is perhaps the most famous example. The left side of the image shows the idealized model with the central cities surrounded by intensive farming and dairying, with a forest belt giving way to extensive field crops such as wheat, followed by an outer ring furthest from the city of ranching, which is an extensive activity requiring large tracts of land. On the right side of the image, we see this model as applied to Europe in the latter part of the 19th century. Models can also be used to understand spatial interaction, which can be defined as the movement across geographic space and exchanging of goods or ideas. Here we see the spread of the Industrial Revolution from its center in England outwards towards Germany and extending eastward. Note the essential resources of coal and iron ore. Geographers define areal functional specialization as the particular people in particular places concentrating on the production of particular goods. This is embodied by the Roman Empire, in which grains were grown in parts of northern Africa. The Elbe region of Germany was used to produce iron ore, and southern Spain was mined for silver and lead. Such specialization can be found all over the world, including in our backyard in California.